And welcome, one and all, to this week's Come Follow Me. Thank you very much for joining us. We did start a little bit late, had to actually press the go live button. I thought I had pressed it, so it happened. I'm not
Better late than
perfect,
never.
guys. Yeah, better late than never. Sections 134 or 133 and 134. We actually did a little bit of talking offline here a little bit. We wanted to work backwards a bit. Um, primarily because section 134 is kind of the general understanding is that it's in line with the eighth article of faith. So, Jessica, yeah, I think you had some thoughts on that. What do you?
Well, my thought was mostly I think we're going to let Mike do this one because he's the one that came
Yes.
prepared for 134 and I have a lot on 133 and I think 133 is out of order from the revelations, but 134 is a little bit more like closer in order
Mhm.
and it's a shorter section. So, I don't know, Mike, do you want to give do you have the historical context for that or do you want me to summarize that cuz I do have that.
So 134 was written by Oliver Cowdery under Sidney Rigdon's supervision while Joseph was away on a mission in Michigan, and presented to a general conference of the church and voted on and adopted. When Joseph came back, though, he did ratify it and reprinted it in the newspaper. So he fully endorsed the revelation. Some, however, point out, well, he also endorsed the original section 101. So they use that as a reason to say, well, so we can throw away 134. The problem is the repetition of 134 in church teachings ever since it was ratified. And so, we have like the most common one today would be how much is the church doing for religious freedom on a global scale that we're talking about and going to symposiums and stuff. Like, just if it wasn't today, it was yesterday. Elder Bednar was in Abu Dhabi at some kind of religious tolerance and freedom conference there. And
Right.
this is on the heels of him being there to dedicate the first chapel in Azerbaijan, which is a huge move, 97% Muslim country.
Wow.
And so he's going all over that EMEA region, that Middle East, North Africa, the Levant, all that right now, and doing a bunch of stuff. And so, and we know that's been a huge focus of President Oak's time as an apostle, and now he's prophet president. And so, what's that going to mean there? That ties into 134 because of what it says primarily in verse 2. That's the big one, but also verse 12. And so you have that focus where, and it is, the eighth article of faith. Men are allowed, to worship according to the dictates of their conscience and all that. We protect religious freedom for all people. Joseph is famous for having said that he would just as soon die for a Mohammedan, which is what they used to call Muslims, as he would for a member of his church. And so on. In fact, the saints were like some of the only friendly people to Catholics. People don't understand American religious history. Americans hated Catholics because they were generally Protestant, and all the Catholic Protestant wars over in Europe, that bad blood kind of spills over, not in a bloody, messy way, except toward us. But Catholics had a hard time finding a place to root, and so did Jews. And who was kind and good to them were the saints. And so there's a lot that goes into us putting that principle into action, and always having done so. And in today's terms, what we seek for example, is for like with the same-sex stuff and LGBTQ in the church. We look for ways to protect the church's interests in how we perform our ordinances in the temple and otherwise, and how we proclaim the doctrine of the family from incursions of governments that would seek to usurp authority over religious institutions to tell them what they must and have to do. So, for example, there have been laws attempted in some states and cities that would force religion to adopt, like, no, you must conform to a trans man actually being a man and a trans woman actually being a woman and consider them as such. And we've done a really good job of combating all of that and winning every case, because some have gone to court. We have one case that just got filed a few months ago, that is going to the Supreme Court. We joined an amicus briefing, you guys remember that, in July. And so I guess it's like 4 months ago now. And so we have a lot going on about these issues, and they're very pressing today. Section 134, to me, is really one of those sections that, as the saints, I hope we don't throw away because, it says it's not a revelation. It's still doctrine because we're repetitively following what it says. There's been no rescinding of any points of it. There's a point about like not messing with slaves in order to keep the peace with their masters. But again, it was written in 1835. So people try to foo-foo it for like that reason, for the reason it's not revelation or whatever. Well, what are the Articles of Faith? The Articles of Faith talk about being subject to kings and all this other stuff. And an example I'll give, and then I'll get into more doctrine, and I have some quotes and some things, but an example I'll give is East Germany. They got a temple during communism in the 80s. And then the wall falls shortly after the temple. I don't think that's too coincidental, but whatever. It's kind of like the walls of Jericho in my view. But the saints were being heavily oppressed. I mean, everyone in East Germany is. And they stay the course. They abide by what the church teaches. They were good citizens, and they got rewarded. And they got rewarded with the temple. There's no bigger reward you can get in this earth than a temple nearby you, right? That to receive your endowment. And to be able to perform that work also for your kindred dead. And they were able to do that in a time and a place when nobody thought it was possible. As you guys know, I served my mission in Russia. And at the time I got called, there were so many members in my family ward and stake. They're like, we honestly never thought we would see the day that the gospel was in Russia. Now, I went there in 2004. That's after, the church was already there for 12, 13 years at that point. But they just remembered communist. Right. And so, that temple in East Germany was like that last thing that needed to happen. And it only happened, and I believe on a spiritual front, it helped topple the whole regime, the whole bloc, eastward on through Russia, because the saints there, in few number, by the way, it's like the 300, what was the guy's name? Gideon, the 300, Gideon, he was the commander.
Right, Gideon.
He was Gideon. Yeah, Gideon. Gideon with his 300 went out and then, army of 10,000 or whatever. And they won. And it's kind of like that, honestly. Like, it doesn't matter that there was only so few of them. It did matter that they were being oppressed, but it didn't matter to the extent that because of their faithfulness over enough period of time, they got a temple. It's miraculous. I don't know how else to describe it, because you're talking about what President Oaks called, godless communism. And so many others have. I mean, it's godless in every way. And I have some quotes on that. And the only reason I bring it up is because I'm going to try to be careful with my words and not get you guys struck or anything. But we were talking joining the call, I guess. And in 134, there's 3 primary or inalienable or natural rights, or whatever you want to call them, that are listed: life, liberty, property. In the Declaration of Independence, it's the pursuit of happiness, which is property. And so those are declarative. And we have, obviously outside the church, many that do not believe in these rights. But then inside the church, we have some factions who also don't believe in these rights. And so certain things like the unbirthing of babies who might be in a womb, church members support that. Some do, right? They support all the SSA stuff, LGBTQ stuff, which is anti-family, which would go against religious freedom and our conscience. They seek to usurp that authority over everyone else. Well, congrats, Curie.
It's kind of interesting that you're talking about this now. When we get this $2 super chat, from Kaori,
we should all be giving him $2. He just had a baby,
right?
Yeah,
well, yeah, times 1,000.
Oh wow!
The gift said go up, Curie. But and then obviously property. There's members of the church that are like democratic socialists, and they think that that's like some soft form of like peaceful way to get into it. There's no peaceful way to oppress people. Right. And so, like, for example, again, I said I had some quotes. I'm trying to truncate here a bit, but the main point is Zion is for the pure in heart. And how can you be pure in heart if you don't abide by these principles and allow others their proper rights and exercise of them? Mm-hmm. You don't have to agree with how someone chooses to use their property, but you have to agree that that person has a right to their property and you don't. Like, it's pretty basic, right? And it sounds basic. It tells people go, well, but we should force XYZ. We should coerce XYZ. We should violate their rights for XYZ because it's the right thing to do.
Well, President Oakes, he like, if you guys go into like the gospel topics essays and you look up like religious freedom, you know how they always have like current modern prophets and like what they say about it. It links you to a talk called Loving Others and Living with Differences. And the way he concludes that one is kind of addressing this issue that we have of like being in the world, but not of the world. How do you exit and leave Babylon when you're surrounded by it? And he basically teaches those principles that are in the Articles of Faith, which is, we believe in this free exercise of religion and freedom because this is vital to our ability to choose and our accountability before God. I mean, we came to this world to choose specifically. But then he kind of wraps it all up by saying how in so many circumstances in life, we have to live with differences. And sometimes those differences are like really extreme, but as followers of Christ, we still have to live peaceably with other people who we don't share values with. And he talks about how even with regard to like the commandments and our view of like morality, we still have to be willing to be peaceable with people whose moral standards are like far different than ours, or even maybe like what we would consider abominable, like in terms of like the scriptures, like how the scriptures would describe some of these things.
That's such a test for us today, that we don't conform to the ways of the world and become violent in these other things, right? That we don't start to revile our neighbors, dig pits for them, all the things, be backbiter, like all the stuff that Paul writes the people in the last days will be like. We need to not be like that. And so I have, like I said, I have a few quotes here. Oh yeah, go ahead before I go.
Well, because I've read Spinoza.
Oh yeah, Timothy Spinoza, right?
Yeah, where a lot of the ideas that we understand from the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, even from the church's perspective, has been something of conversation. You go into look at Spinoza, he talks about the natural rights, the inalienable rights of humanity. And I can't find it, but I did I did a post some years ago with regards to what is the proper role of the government. And the proper role of the government is to maintain fidelity to the natural inalienable rights of humanity, the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that we are to enjoy our property, that we are to enjoy the blessings, that's what made us great as a nation and as a people. Yet as time goes on and humanity does what humanity does, there's always somebody who wants to throw the monkey wrench into the gears of something that's working. But this idea that we have, that we still enjoy today, is the idea that we are to sustain and maintain fidelity to those ideals. And that's what I see in sections 134. And we're seeing a lot of divisiveness today in our culture and our society, not just political. We're seeing a lot of religious divisiveness because of the political.
Oh yeah, so that's something where it's like people prioritize their politics above their religion too much. And this is all people. I'm not excluding saints from it, and I'm not excluding any other group. This is common.
Yeah,
And
Elder Rosband actually talked about that recently, you guys. He actually said it was April 2022 General Conference, he hit on this subject like super hard, and he was specifically calling out the fact that what you just said, people are prioritizing their political beliefs above even their religious values. And he was talking about how it's like a scourge that's sweeping the globe, is what he called it. And he was saying how there's attacks on like our religious freedom. And then he kind of reiterated what those inalienable rights should be, which is everything you guys just said. And then he actually quoted Joseph Smith, and I think this is the attitude we're supposed to have, but he said the prophet Joseph Smith stated, "I am bold to declare before heaven that I am just as ready to die in defending the rights of a Presbyterian, a Baptist, or a good man of any other denomination for the same principle which would trample upon the rights of the saints." And saints would trample on the rights upon the rights of Roman Catholics or any other denomination who may be unpopular and too weak to defend themselves. So he's saying like we should be fighting for everyone's right to worship how, when, and what they may.
Right.
And I like this because I feel like, okay, just this week I saw, because I'm doing like homeschool this year, and so I've been like researching all these like little homeschool things. And there was this video that I saw of this like Christian lady who had literally made a video trying to like do like a cancel culture move on The Good and the Beautiful because it's owned by a Latter-day Saint. And she like literally spent an hour talking about like all the hidden Mormon doctrines in The Good and the Beautiful. And this is what I'm talking about. It's like this weird kind of like hatred and like this weird sort of like if you can't live with people's differences, then it starts causing this like contention and this like evil, like this hatred and this persecution in society. And our prophets and apostles teach us the opposite of that. Like, don't
be
be
peacemakers.
Yeah. On that note, I don't mean to derail it so far. I showed my wife that video, and we were both like our jaws were just on the floor during that entire time. Full disclosure, my wife and I homeschool our kids, and you know, and The Good and the Beautiful is one of the curriculum that we use. And my goodness, just the absolute vitriol that was spewed by this woman was just insane.
You know, if we paid it well enough attention, I got texts from several people after President Oak's last remarks in conference. And they're like, was he just saying we need a homeschool? And I was like, yeah, guys.
Yeah.
And so like with some of my buddies, they do. And they're like, well, I guess we're doing the right thing. And I was like, okay, we got to look at like a pod or something, you know, homeschooling pods. I don't know if any of you guys do that.
Well, occasionally it depends on what kind of pod or co-op that you want to do, but you know that's a completely different discussion for what.
I know. I'm going to bring it back.
Well,
I just thought it was
funny.
No,
we can't bring it back because why are people homeschooling right now? Like, what are some of the things
that is why
that is so to protect their religious liberty for the most part.
Yes,
as parents.
And you guys, there's actually a bill coming up in Utah that's supposed to be looked at in January of 2026, where they're trying to actually centralize this more and eliminate more school choice. Like they want to eliminate like some of the LEAs and have everybody go through one centralized state-run reimbursement program, which will trample more on these liberties that we enjoy right now. So even in Utah, like this is happening, and so yeah, religious freedom super important. I don't know, Mike, did you find any of the commentary that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I got some here. So I mean, it's kind of like weaving a story a little bit. Bruce R. McConkie, 1975 April conference. Now, I think it is perfectly clear that the Lord expects far more of us than we sometimes render in response. We are not as other men. We are the saints of God and have the revelations of heaven. Where much is given, much is expected. We are to put first in our lives the things of his kingdom. And I bring that up because the mirror image that happens between, if you take the political route, you always end up in the same place. You're going to end up authoritarian. Doesn't matter if you're left wing, right wing. If that's the route you take, you end up authoritarian. That's not the church, its doctrines, the United Order, any of it. None of it is political. and I'm going to get to that. So none of it being political. This is going to be a long one, so bear with me. This is from this is Marion G. Romney. Sorry, I thought it was J. Reuben Clark. It's Marion G. Romney, 1966, General Conference in April as well. He says, he goes to 5 points. First point, the cornerstone of the United Order is belief in God and acceptance of him as Lord of the earth and author of the United Order. Socialism, wholly materialistic, and you can substitute socialism for authoritarianism if you want. I don't care. Fascism, all of it. It's all in there. Wholly materialistic is founded in the wisdom of men and not of God. Although all socialists may not be atheists, none of them, in theory or practice, seek the Lord to establish his righteousness. I've been told by several people just this weekend that they're socialists and they're in the church, and I'm like, oh, no wonder like you support the unaliving of little children and stuff. Anyway, the United Order, point 2, the United Order is implemented by the voluntary free will actions of men and women, evidenced by a consecration of all their property to the Church of God. Socialism is implemented by external force, the power of the state. Point 3, the United Order is operated upon the principle of private ownership and individual management. This is the point nobody likes to understand. A stewardship is just another word for private property. It's the scriptural term for private property.
Right.
End of story. That's all it is. It doesn't mean that the church owns it because they deed it back to you. Anyway, that gets explained later. So thus, in both implementation and ownership and management of property, the United Order preserves to men their God-given agency while socialism deprives them of it. Number 4, the United Order is non-political. Non-political. Socialism is political, both in theory and in practice. So in orthodoxy and orthopraxy, it is thus exposed to and riddled by the corruption that plagues and finally destroys all political governments that undertake to abridge man's agency. Number 5, a righteous people is a prerequisite to the United Order. Socialism argues that it as a system will eliminate the evils of the profit motive. The United Order exalts the poor and humbles the rich. In the process, both are sanctified. This is the coming together of earth and heaven motif, okay? Whereas in socialism, we hear the top-down, bottom-up approach, and they try to mirror everything. It's all a mimicry. But that's advocacy and agitation and revolt. And Satan as the light bringer, or Lucifer as the light bringer, if you ever heard that phrase. That's the socialist, right? He's the one that rebelled, and because he rebelled, he's virtuous and righteous. It's a weird way. That's a bit of a tangent, but that's in there. That's in a lot of the socialist writings from the 19th century. The United Order. Oh yeah, go on. Yeah.
So yeah, I found the article that I wrote. It's on my Medium. Unfortunately, I share the screen because I have it up top, and so it's not connected to my other monitor.
Oh. Well, we'll get it later.
But ensuring liberty and freedom. Here's what I wrote. One of the foremost duties of any government is to protect the individual liberties and freedoms of its citizens. Ezra Taft Benson, he was very political in his thought, and he emphasized the importance of government in defending these essential rights. He argued that without a government committed to safeguarding liberties, true democracy cannot thrive. Think about it. What would our lives be like without the assurance that our individual rights are protected? Without oversight, we might not have the freedom to express our opinions, practice our chosen religions, or even own property. The very first and foremost is that of freedom of speech. This allows us to voice our beliefs without fear of retaliation. Second is freedom of religion, to ensure that we are able to practice or not practice any faith without persecution. And then the right to privacy, which protects us from unwarranted intrusion into our personal lives. Those are the 3 fundamental foundations of true democracy in relationship to what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So I am going to continue. That was really good. Oh, Xander, Mosiah, whatever I'm supposed to call you. Did you have
I've had stuff wanted. I don't want to interrupt because you're a lot. You're coming from the spiritual side of this, and you keep talking the inherent right of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here as the military historian. What was the great? We talk about religious freedom, but in 600 BC or not B 80, they wrote burn the heretics' books, destroy their buildings.
Right.
1500 AD, tie the Protestants up, put a stick of bundle of wood at their feet, light it on fire.
Yep.
1618, the 30 Years' War starts. Protestants versus Catholics. It really was not until, and that very loose, that a freedom of religious choice was not until the birth of the United States. And even then, I say it because your Puritans, your separatists from the Anglican Church, they weren't leaving England for the colonies because land of opera. It was, we want to worship how we want.
Mm-hmm.
You still had up until, again, really until the American Revolution, you still had France and Spain and going at it with the Protestant nations. It was not till that birth, and it was literally because, well, you're not Catholic, you're not Protestant. Mary of Scots pushed England back to Catholicism.
Yeah.
I was going to say Anglicanism, but no, she pushed it back to Catholicism. Elizabeth pushed it more towards Protestantism. James went full-blown Anglican. Yeah. And we have proof in, I know we're supposed to say King James Version all the way, but I hate the King James Version. It is very much clear you had a king in there going at it, that we are going to solidify the authority of the crown and in that to suppress religion.
Yeah.
It wasn't
maybe there's something to be said about the No Kings protests.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, we don't have one, and they can't have that protest in Canada either. So it's a no tyrant protest, I guess.
Right.
But it said it wasn't till Madison wrote the Constitution, the founders went, "Oh crap! We didn't put anything about our grievances with England that we felt they were trapped," and created the Bill of Rights. That was the first time any nation in recorded history said, worship who you want. Be Protestant, be Anglican, be Catholic. Worship.
Start your own.
Start your own.
Yeah.
So, Flying Spaghetti Monster, you're a 28-year-old American.
Well,
worship a dragon.
Well, my understanding of the
Catholics,
First Amendment, my understanding of the First Amendment, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the idea behind the freedom of speech coincides with the right to religious worship.
Yeah.
That one of the reasons why there was a push to have the ability to speak freely was because of King George, was because you couldn't speak out against him because he was the representative authority of the church and the country. That he was basically he was the modern day version at that time of the Pontifex Maximus, which was what the Roman emperor was.
Like yes and no, though, because Maryland was a Catholic state. It was written in their bylaws that
Right.
that
and Massachusetts,
Catholic Maryland. Yeah, Massachusetts, and then and I think they were the only two. And then Pennsylvania, right, was its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
New York was its own thing, which I think was Episcopalian or something. And so each state.
All of the colonies were based on a group of people and a religious belief.
Correct.
And when they very first got started, this is actually what caused. So they all united for the Revolutionary War.
Right.
This was important. This was led by God. We have it in the Doctrine and Covenants. This was literally, the Constitution was inspired. I'm actually teaching the Constitution lesson this week. I've been teaching it all week to my kids. And then during the time when they realized that the Articles of Confederation are causing problems for them to have economic trade, and that none of these colonies could agree on how they wanted to run.
Yeah.
And so this was the biggest challenge in making the Constitution come about. And when you read the backstory of this is actually so what brought them away from England was exactly this. It was that they could not practice the religion that they wanted to. So they come to America, they set up each colony. Each colony is mostly centered on some type of religious or cultural tradition. And then when they're under threat and they decide that they want to break away from British rule, because they were under it for a couple hundred years, and then they go in and they're okay, we're gonna separate, and then they start the Revolutionary War, and then right after that, the country's so in debt, people hadn't even gotten paid, who had fought in the Revolutionary War. The states are all these colonies are all fighting at this point, And then this is like a miracle that like the Constitution even gets written, that it even gets ratified, that like any of this stuff even happens. Because like when you dig into the like minutia of it, you're just like, how did this even happen? It was clearly the hand of the Lord that not only helped them win against the greatest army and navy in the world, but that they could then come together with like these extreme differences. And then from there, they kind of are able to get what the whole point, the whole purpose is prophesied by Nephi, and it's to help so that there's a government on earth at the time that can facilitate the establishment of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and like the gospel and the restoration and everything that we enjoy today. That was the whole point. Now, there's a flip side to this because Section 134, and I'm going to segue now into 133 because we've been talking about this for like almost 40 minutes.
Yeah.
But like this is why I wanted to do 134 first, because you have to understand that this was requisite. Like this was requisite. We would have none of what we have today without these principles of religious freedom. And then when you see like the prophecies, and you start putting all together these classical prophecies, and there's tons of them mentioned in Section 133. Now, Section 133, what's really cool about this is this was actually written around the same time as Section 1, and these go together, they parallel each other, and when you put them together, you can see that there's a parallel happening. Section 1 of Doctrine and Covenants is the preface, and then Section 133 is the appendix to the Doctrine and Covenants, which means it was intended to come at the end. We do have some sections that come after it, but if you parallel it with Section 1, then you get a really clear understanding of what the message is happening here. And so like Doctrine and Covenants, Section 133 is kind of like this sweeping last days roadmap. And it pulls together all the major scriptural motifs about the second coming into one like climactic chapter. It starts out with a covenant summons. You see it with hearken, prepare, sanctify yourselves. And this is like God's kind of like universal call, the call out. And then he has his saints enact this like new exodus. He's telling them to go ye out of Babylon and leave wickedness behind. And he is echoing all of these great prophecies about Zion and Jerusalem from like Isaiah, Revelation, and the Book of Mormon. And these are all coming together. You know, you can pull in all the classical prophets like Ezekiel, Zechariah, Daniel. And then you get this bridegroom motif where the saints need to awake and arise. And this is like covenant language, think temple, like think about the ascension, all of this. And then also arise to the calling, because there's this calling that Nephi explains in First Nephi, like chapter starting like maybe chapter 14, when he's talking about what is to happen in the end time and how the gospel is supposed to go forth from the Gentiles to his descendants, like this literal house of Israel that he sees as his descendants in the future. And this awake and arise, this is the call. This is like Ephraim's birthright. This is like, hey, you guys have a role and responsibility to be the kings and the queens to the original house of Israel, the foster fathers, nursing mothers, bring them the gospel, bring them into the covenant, gather the house of Israel. This goes back to the Joseph in Egypt and his story, and Ephraim and Manasseh and their birthright. So that's all of this is in Section 133. And then you got the angel that flies through the bits of heaven with this everlasting gospel. He's fulfilling Revelation chapter 14. And you can think of this as a collective angel. It's not just the angel Moroni, because Joseph Smith, he's visited by several angels who all play a part in the restoring of the gospel. We often think of it as angel Moroni, but when you really dig into it, you realize that there's a multiple like work that's happening here. And angel Moroni is kind of the one who first initiates it. And then you get this like restoration that's identified in this Section 133. There's like, it's describing the restoration. And then it refers back to like Christ's appearance, and it references back to the winepress in Isaiah 63 and how the Lord's garments will be in red when he appears at his second coming. So there's all these really great kind of beautiful motifs happening. Like I ended up breaking it down by, there's an end time exodus, like a Babylon and a gathering motif happening. There's the bridegroom one, the angel and everlasting gospel one. the winepress and like the dyed garments, and then this weak things and threshing of the nations, which I think is pretty much tied to section 134, because what happens and what causes this is actually those things. It's when you can think Assyrian and Babylonian conquests of ancient days. And what did they do? They did the opposite of what section 134 describes. They trampled on the freedom. They scattered Israel. They took away their rights to worship their God. And then they intermingled with them and, caused apostasy even greater than, the world had ever known. And so I think that when you kind of like see that connection, you understand that there's several reasons why we want religious freedom. It's not just so that we can be free. It's because these types of laws and government, the way that nations choose to govern, is directly tied to their accountability before God. And it's directly tied to these prophecies of ancient days. And it is prophesied that in the end of time, there will be something akin to that ancient Assyrian and Babylonian conquering, and that it will start sweeping the earth. And in the context, like this is a huge backdrop for the end time
Can I just
scenario.
ask, is there
But
an
Zion
acronym?
rises out of it.
Is there an acronym that could describe this movement? Like maybe like a 5-letter acronym with a
Are you talking about an acrostic?
With a 5-letter acronym with like a plus sign at the end or something.
I mean, I think that would be the ideologies. But I actually have a diagram of this where you have to think of it in a couple of different ways.
Rainbow.
Yeah.
So think about in the book of Revelation, because this is one of the motifs that's happening here, but you have the beast and the harlot. The harlot rides the beast. And in the book of Revelation, eventually the beast actually tramples and kills the harlot for its own survival. And this is important to understand, because these are types. It's like using a metaphor to describe the powers that be in the world. And the harlot kind of represents those ideologies and the morality of the world, whereas the beast represents those like powers that be that are actually governing and like have political power in the world. So these two things, for a time they work together, and they're kind of like drunk and high off of each other. But then in the end time, when the beast feels threatened because there's actually a rising up of righteousness, it turns on the harlot. And so this is like a really huge motif in the book of Revelation. And so they had a couple of quotes, and I think they're really good for section 133. So President Nelson in 2020, in his talk, The Future of the Church, he said, I think it was an Ensign article, actually. It was an Ensign article in April. And he said, "Remember that the fullness of Christ's ministry lies in the future. The prophecies of his second coming have yet to be fulfilled. We are just building up to the climax of this last dispensation, when the Savior's second coming becomes a reality." And he also said, and this was in another talk, he said, "The time is coming when those who do not obey the Lord will be separated from those who do." And one of the things that, and he also advised that like the greatest assurance we could have is to be worthy of admission to the Lord's house, to the temple. And so that was all in that other talk. I think that one, it might have even been the same talk. I'll have to go back and pull it up. But I just was like trying to take notes for you guys. So I pulled a couple quotes. And then one of the things that I kind of wanted to just pose as food for thought. So everybody in the comments, start thinking about this, and then start dropping some comments of what you think. But we often, we celebrate the Savior's first advent, right? It's going to be coming up on Christmas. We're constantly looking back at this time when Jesus Christ came. And we, all through the Christmas season, we're telling stories surrounding Jesus Christ's miraculous birth. We know about the annunciation of his birth and the betrothal with Joseph and Mary, and like how the angel intervened there. We know like all the signs and the wonders that preceded his first coming. And this is all kind of part of our cultural tradition, but now consider his second coming. And there's, because there's going to come a day where this actually happens. And then what do you think? Do you think we're going to be celebrating and commemorating the second coming? Do you think that we'll see a night and a day and like a day and a night and a day as one day? Do you think that we'll see like signs in the heavens? Like do we honestly believe what we're taught? That's the question. Like, do we really believe that this is actually going to happen, and that he's really actually resurrected, and he's really going to come back, and he's really going to reign? Like, do we honestly believe that?
Right.
And when you go through section 133 and you're looking at these motifs, just kind of have that question in your mind, like, do I really believe this? Like, do I actually think that what President Nelson said is true, that we need to be getting ready and that we should be prepared? And why is he saying that? Why would he be telling us that? and then to be fair, I mean,
Right.
the Lord's been saying he's coming quickly for like 200 years, right? So like, I don't know if quickly means the same thing to him as what it means to me, but my definition of quickly is like totally different than 200 years.
Well, and Peter and Paul and the other apostles, they thought it might happen in their life until they got older. And then they went, actually, wait, guys, there's going to be a falling away first and all that. But for a while, they were like, well, he came back like after his resurrection. He's just around the corner. And it took them a bit to realize that too. But
so section 133, this is like specifically tied to Malachi, and it references it in there. There's a lot of references to mostly Isaiah and to Malachi. And so, you kind of have to go back and like look at Isaiah and what that whole entire vision from like the first chapter to the last chapter is teaching. And then look at Malachi. Malachi, he prophesies the great and dreadful day of the Lord in Malachi 4:5. And he says he's going to send Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Well, this revelation, this appendix was given before Kirtland. So this was before Elijah had even come when this prophecy or this revelation that we have in the Doctrine and Covenants was recorded and was given. And that's something to think about. But when you look at like the great and dreadful day, like if you guys like actually do like a scripture search on this, you're going to see how many prophets prophesy. And then you'll look and see how many times this is brought up in the Doctrine and Covenants, many, many times. And you'll see that when Joseph Smith in his history, like if you go to Joseph Smith history, chapter 1 and in like verse 38, you see again this prophecy of Elijah the prophet coming before the great and dreadful day. Well, why is he coming? He's coming because of what Malachi said. And it's because we need to get these links back in place. We need to relink the family and bind ourselves to Jesus Christ and to each other. And I had pulled several different talks, but I'm just going to try to briefly summarize them for the sake of time. One of them I was looking at was President Nelson. It's the Everlasting Covenant. He had talked a lot about the Abrahamic covenant. He talks a little bit about the concept of Hesed. And I do have like that quote in here if you guys want me to read the whole thing, but it's very long. But essentially, this talks about that concept of Hesed in section 133. And this whole idea of binding, like Joseph Smith said in Malachi, when he says, turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, that it should really be bind. And this is a good word to use because when you're looking at like what's actually happening, think back to like section 128. Think back to what I said last week about section 109 and how if you go to section 109, which is that revelatory prayer that was given for the Kirtland Temple, which comes after section 133, there's this very clear, starting in verse 68, progression that's happening where you can see how this binding starts rolling out. And it begins with the prophet Joseph Smith and Emma Smith and their immediate connections. And then it goes to the presidents of the church and their immediate connections. And then it goes to the church and their immediate connections, and then to the world. And this is how this gospel has rolled forth. So if you go back to Daniel chapter 2, verses 39 through 45, and the stone cut out of the mountain without hands, section 109 very clearly describes how this happens and the process and the order that this priesthood order and covenant is going to be rolling forth. And so just kind of think about that. And then I don't know if you guys want to talk about these motifs, but I did pull a lot of commentary that I have on these motifs, and they do refer a lot back to Isaiah. And I have a lot on the book of Revelation that I can share. But just think about the binding and Hesed and what Hesed means. It's like a loving kindness. It's a unique term. There's no English word or language that can adequately describe this, but it's describing a special relationship with the Lord where he binds you to him And when you enter into that covenant, and this becomes particularly strengthened when you are married in the temple and you're keeping your temple covenants. And the reason why is because now you're doing the family thing. So think baptism gets you in the gate, and then you want to organize in a family. So like all the stones get brought in the gate, the stones get stacked up and organized, and then they get sealed. So that's the keys of Moses, the keys of Elias, and the keys of Elijah. And they're all coming together to build this beautiful house of the Lord.
Right. And that goes back to the conversation of the keys of the kingdom to bind and loose in heaven. It is that whole binding that you're talking about. And from my perspective, from what I've studied, if you look at 3rd Nephi, prior to Christ's descension from heaven to the people, and then you compare it to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and what all led up to that judgment against that generation, because they, when you understand the scriptures of that, it's referring to the destruction of Jerusalem, which fulfilled the Jewish diaspora, that the Jews no longer they were utterly destroyed. The temple was destroyed, the city was destroyed, and everybody was dispersed. That's the reason we have the restoration now. And with that, this is the reason why I say that today, because of the restoration, Gentiles are receiving the gospel first, and we're going over to the Jews. Once the fullness of the Gentiles come in, the Jews are going to start embracing the restored gospel message through that process. And the first shall be last and last shall be first. And that's what Christ says twice in Matthew 19 and then in Matthew 20. And there's the imperative verbs, the imperative command: hearken, prepare, go out, flee, make bare his arm, and send forth elders, sanctify, be clean. And the promises is that the Lord will come with healing, power, glory, and vengeance. And so he's going to come with vengeance upon the wicked, and then he's going to come healing and glory for those who are righteous, who are maintaining fidelity to the covenants. And my takeaway is, looking at this, there is the shifting of the wheat, I believe, is happening. The great sifting is happening. That the harvest is getting more and more plenty, and we're getting to the closing end game where Christ is going to be coming, and either you're going to be prepared or you're not going to be prepared. And if you're not prepared, then it even says that people will be like in the days of Noah, where they're just eating and drinking and being married, and they're not having any concern of going to happen tomorrow. And even if
let's look
whatever
at
happens
section
tomorrow, they're not really
133.
concerned about it.
There's like some key verses, and Monty, I don't know if you want to pull this up or not, but there's some key verses in section 133. So what I actually went through this section and I organized it by the motifs. So if you go to section 133, and maybe we can show people this, but start in verse 4. And we don't have to read all this, but I just want to kind of have you scroll. And if you kind of scroll through it, from verses 4 through 15 is talking about this Exodus, Babylon, and gathering to Zion and Jerusalem motif. And so everybody can kind of see on here, it's just, you can kind of see what's happening here. The elders of the church are going forth. They're going to the nations, to the isles of the seas, first upon the Gentiles, then the Jews. And then you've got the land of Zion and her borders being enlarged, the stakes. And so this is the work. And then notice that reference to the bridegroom. We'll get to that motif in a little bit, because there's two motifs happening here and these overlap. And the main messages here from verse 4 to like maybe 15 is, go ye out from Babylon. Okay. And then you can kind of see a few key points. Be ye clean that bear the vessels of the Lord in verse 5. And then there's some other verses in section 133 that also use this motif. So it gets used from verse 20 to verse 24. And then it kind of repeats in verses 26 to 35. So there's this whole Exodus motif, this Babylon, gathering to Zion, Jerusalem, this Exodus out of Babylon. And so you can think spiritual Babylon, but you can also think physical, because at a certain point, and you kind of get this from Isaiah and from the book of Revelation, that if you're reading it on the literal level, that there is literally like a war happening. But then he has
I have a question. So I have a question, and it's been burning since I've been studying this. And we go back to is it Second Nephi? He talks about the great and abominable church. I believe he's describing Babylon as the great abominable church. It's a coexistent,
It's
co-equal
Nephi's version
of
of
religious
Isaiah's
and
Babylon.
pagan philosophies, and that
Yeah.
is the great abominable church. That the great and spacious building is the great abominable church.
I actually like.
Nephi says anything that's not Christ's church is the great and abominable
Right.
church. It's
I
that
actually
simple.
I actually came across an old copy of my Book of Mormon, an old quad that I got right after I got back from my mission. And in that, I actually wrote in the margins of First Nephi 13, or no, it was First Nephi 14, where it referenced Revelation 17, talking about the whore of Babylon and how the great and abominable church was Babylon. Anything that takes on the philosophies of Babylon is considered the great and abominable church. That is what Nephi was warning about. And so, yeah, it's kind of that marriage there. And on top of that, anyone who studies both 134 and 133 and 134, notice when these were received.
Mhm.
These were received in 1931 for 133 and 1835.
1831.
1831. Yes, sorry.
Man, Monty, like I didn't.
You're
I
off
didn't
a
realize
few
that
centuries.
Hiram Smith was writing
Off by
stuff
about
down
a
on, like,
century.
almost 100.
My mind is fried, man. Like seriously.
No, but Monty, so you bring up, and this just tells you how immature I was when I was 8. I got a hold of a first edition Mormon Doctrine by McConkie.
Yeah.
And I referenced in my old set of scriptures.
Uh-oh.
I literally wrote where it's talked about seeing the great and abominable church.
Oh, no.
I literally put equals Catholic.
Yeah.
Oh no.
That started with Talmadge, though.
Is that
So,
for Mormon doctrine? I mean,
so that just tells you how immature
That's
I was.
how immature
you know,
anyone was. But this is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
when we look at because this was a common thought within church culture for a long time, right? And the fact that like even McConkie stepped away from that after he became an apostle shows a lot of growth on his part, but it also shows how the Lord reveals things to us line by line, precept by precept. Like that's the way it's always been. I mean, we see that happening even now, where we're having to adjust a lot of the presuppositions that we've had regarding many different things. But using the garment redesign as an example, right? Like a lot of people, had this understanding, like, oh well, we got to be physically modest because we got to cover the garment. No, that understanding has since shifted. That while modesty, physical appearance was something that we should be, showing respect for ourselves in, it was always about the covenants that we make.
I'm sure every girl, at least from the 90s, has had one of those terrible modesty lessons.
Oh yeah. No, and the thing is, this wasn't just something that happened in church. I remember growing up in that and that having happened. Like and hearing, other, mothers telling that to their daughters. It was like, holy cow, like looking back, it's like, geez, just how far off the point were we?
Yeah.
So in the
well,
do you guys want more of like the symbols? Do you guys want to keep doing motif stuff? Like let me know in the comments, because I have like a ton on these motifs, and I know we're not going to get through this all because we only have like 30 minutes. But let me know in the comments which motif you would rather spend more time on. We're kind of talking right now about Exodus, Babylon, and Gathering, that motif. There's the bridegroom motif. There's the angel with the everlasting gospel motif. And this kind of ties into the 4 angels and the 4 winds. And then there's the winepress motif. And then that like kind of threshing of the nations, the weak things threshing the nations motif. And right now, if we look at that Babylon and the Exodus out of Babylon motif, this pertains a little bit to it's kind of like in Revelation chapter 8, where you see those judgments going out on the earth, and you have like the 4 angels of the destroying angels, but they're also gathering. They're doing 2 things. They're destroying and gathering. They're judging and gathering. And Wilford Woodruff, when the Salt Lake Temple dedication happened, he had talked a little bit about how those 4 angels would now go forth in the earth once like the temple had been restored fully, the endowment fully, the sealing fully. At that point we had all of the temple ordinances restored, and then the temple was dedicated and built. And this was a pretty big deal. I have a huge long quote where President Joseph Fielding Smith, he wrote about those 4 destroying angels, and he just explained how these are now at work in the earth. And he said that they're on their sacred mission even now. And then he told the story of Wilford Woodruff and how he had spoke to audiences about these 4 angels. Well, these 4 angels are tied to the 4 winds. And one thing that I wanted to point out, symbolism wise, is that yes, America is the new Egypt, totally, in Isaiah.
Well,
but don't let me lose my train of thought. Hold on. So the 4 winds.
No, you're gonna say
Daniel chapter 7. The 4 winds go out before the 4 beasts in Daniel. And this is like a kind of like a fun little symbol that you can look up, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about just for your own private study. But these 4 winds go out first. And so this is basically, if you want to break it down into layman's terms, the gathering of Israel precedes the second coming, and the gathering into this covenant needs to happen before the wrath of God is poured out on the earth. Now that happens during a period of judgments that are being poured out. And this actually began, like to Wilford Woodruff's point, with the dedication of Salt Lake Temple and the restoration of the temple ordinances. So once that's all restored, then people can start being sealed. And so you can think of the 144,000 and the symbolic meaning of what that means in relationship to priesthood. Like priesthood multiplied. It's the multiplicity of blessings that you saw in section 124 and in all these other sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, where Joseph is like, you'll be blessed with a multiplicity of blessings and multiply blah, 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 like forever and ever.
Because one of the passages is about the 144,000. The Lamb shall stand on Mount Zion with the 144,000. My understanding is that the 144,000 are those of the tribes of Israel that are going to be restored when they receive the gospel message. Is
it
that
just
correct?
Means, if you want to look at it, it's basically symbolic of like the full gathering of Israel, like the complete total restoration. So think Article of Faith number 10, and think like the full house of Israel, all 12 tribes finally gathered, finally like multiplied, like priesthood power amplified.
Numerology, Tim.
Yes,
numerology.
it goes back to biblical numbers.
Yeah. Well, but you got 12 times 12,000. Every time you add a 0, it's adding more perfection to the number.
Yes.
And so now, the 144,000 is the multiplicity of perfection on top of generational perfection.
Yep.
Of the priests that will be there, the priesthood lineage.
Right. It goes to ancestry and lineage. So think root and branch, and think like Malachi, think Isaiah 11, think Doctrine and Covenant section 113. There's like this idea of root and branch, and these are the things that are being restored. And then that turns into a multiplicity of priesthood and blessings as these tribes are gathered back in. And so this ties back to the government. Like whose right it is to rule. This is the reversal of circumstances that happens at the end of these judgments, or even you could say coinciding with these judgments, because one of the things that I think is kind of fun to look at too is like, if you look at because it brings up this motif about the angel, right? The restored gospel and the angel. We tend to think of like the angel Moroni, but again, try to think bigger, think collective. And one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is how there's this kind of callback to Revelation chapter 14 in section 133. So after these saints are commanded to flee Babylon, then you get this like 4 winds motif. So which it basically means like from one end of heaven to the other. And there's like this symbolic language that the righteous are to gather from all parts of the world, flee out of Babylon, and then they grow into this 144,000 concept, that there's like a
Right.
multiplicity of generational blessings. And this happens in two ways. This happens because people are being sealed together and they're having a posterity that is also part of this covenant relationship with Jesus Christ. But then they're doing the work in the temple, and they're turning the hearts to the fathers, and they're sealing themselves up to their ancestry. So then we've got the roots and the branches reconnected and established, and it creates this immense priesthood power in the earth. And
So
covenant,
it's not a literal number of 144,000 people.
no.
It is a symbolic representation of that.
Mhm.
Or it's 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. If you want, they could be like,
I was not going there.
Well-
Thanks, Michael.
hey,
Well,
Hey, you know what? We already
said
crossed
on
the line when it
YouTube-
came to the Catholics. Why not the J-Dubs too? So, you know, that's
Well, so L said, the 144,000 is the Army of Light. I just want to say we got to come up with a better name for that, because if you ever read the
Saturday
Darth
Night
Bane
Warriors?
novels,
no.
no, you ever read the Darth Bane novels of Star Wars, the Jedi Army at the time was called the Army of Light. So like
Oh,
that's about when they marked their downfall. We got to change it up a little bit here. We don't want Disney knocking on the church's door.
we had it
But
first.
no,
We copyrighted. They took our trademarks. Okay, we're gonna John DeLynn them too.
You know what? That's not a bad claim.
Yeah.
But no. So
Sorry, Jessica. We're totally
No, you're
wild
fine.
right now.
no, sorry. But what Jess was saying about Joseph F. Smith's quote back to Wilford Woodruff.
mhm.
I was actually looking. This shows how I matured. I went from calling the Catholics the great to actually put. So Wilford Woodruff, his initial quote was that God was the four angels had been awoken, but yet he was staying them. They were circling the globe, waiting for when God would loose them upon the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But he was holding them lest they take the wheat with the tares.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Right.
F. Smith, he said, they are now upon the earth. They are now working the fields. And if I remember, I don't have that quote up hand. I got like 1,000 tabs open because I got to mod Tim. I got to mod mine. I got to watch YouTube. So I don't have time. But I think he gave it like right in the midst of World War I. I think it was not long before he died, if I'm correct. And he died literally like a week after the armistice was declared. So,
Right.
But this is what I wrote when I was doing Book of Revelations. Well, I did actually write. That was like one of the few institute courses I do want to repeat. Mostly, because I think the Book of Revelation needs its own course, and that's the only way to get it. But they mimic, those four angels are also right around. And I know we say each period was a seal, but there's only one instance prior to the second coming that those riders come, and that's in the prelude up to the second coming. And
the four horsemen are highly symbolic as well, and you can tie them to the angels. And I do have some commentary on those too. It doesn't really mention them directly in this chapter, but it does in John's Revelation, and they are connected with when these four angels go out, because it's when that seal is open, that first seal. And so the commentary that I have, and I have a lot, I probably have more commentary on the Book of Revelation that's actually collected into my annotations than I do on anything. I have a lot on Isaiah too, but I don't have it all like in my annotations. But we do have the four horsemen representing basically the war that's going to be poured out on the earth, and what the consequences of it are. So each one represents that. And this is so there's a few different ways that the gathering happens, and then that, like, I don't know what you want to call it, the judgments, I guess, like the judgments go out on the earth, and then it causes people to repent, right? Like that's the theme that's happening in John's vision. Well, the bowls are actually different. So the first, there's the seals are open, and then with each seal being opened, there's some kind of like thing happening at each point.
Mhm.
And then that actually, it's at the sounding of the seventh trumpet. So first there's the seven trumpets, then there's the seven bowls or vials of wrath. So the seven trumpets are in Revelation chapter 8 and 9. and then the wrath, you'll see later that that's from like chapters like 15, like I think it's up to 19 where it turns, but it's chapter 16 that shows what's happening when those vials of wrath are being poured out. And these are two separate things, because one of them, it has a limit. And this is what Wilford Woodruff was speaking to. He was speaking to a time where these judgments would be poured out and this gathering process would be happening. And it's two things happening at the same time. There's some judgment, there's some, just ways that God humbles his people. And then and helps to gather. That process helps gathering. It's like the trying. People are tried in these circumstances. And then the angels are able to do to both, to do the sifting, if you will, and to the gathering and the sifting. And then that switches when the seventh trumpet sounds. So there's actually a buildup to a certain point, and it happens in the midst of what's clearly being described as like a war and calamities that are going over the earth. And those four horsemen represent the results of that, like what happens because of that. And then you see in 16 where the bowls are poured out, and that's different. That is where everything is happening now without measure, and it's targeted at the wicked. So instead of everybody and like the whirlwind motif with a 1/3 over the earth, that changes. And now all the destruction is targeted on the wicked. And this is where you see that God's people, they're being sufficiently tried, and those who are gathering in and becoming like a Zion type people, they're able to receive a special protection from the Lord during that time.
So can I ask a quick question, right? So we have the era of preparatory wars. The bowls would then be the wars of destruction.
Yes.
They're not, so the bowls aren't happening during the preparatory war period.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you divide it up by preparatory, like he's referencing Dwayne Crowther. We talked about this in the past, and there's a book that he wrote called Prophecy Key to the Future. It's like a classic book on the second coming. I think it's probably like the most read book. But what he does that's helpful is he divides kind of like the way he's reading all of the commentary and the prophecies into a period of wars that are preparatory, meaning that they help prepare us as a people and the world, and they help to prepare and pave the way for the gospel to go from the Gentiles to the house of Israel, to gather Israel. And then there's a certain point where that shifts, and then he divides that into wars of total destruction. And that total word is important because that's the motif that you see in Book of Revelation chapter 16. It changes from a third part, meaning that there is a measure, to totality, like total destruction. And that's how the motif changes. And I don't think we're in that by any means.
No,
I think we're still in the preparatory wars, but there is something important that comes out of that wrath. And that is that Zion rises.
I want to point something out. Since we're talking about this, I want to be able to point this out because we're talking about the four horsemen of Revelation. And Messiah, you mentioned about the four angels that mimic the four horsemen. The first horseman, the white horse, is conquest. Now you would think conquest comes after war, but this is interesting because the first horseman to appear is conquest, the white horse, and it means that the Antichrist has already claimed victory. Then he makes war with the saints, and that's represented by the red horse. It symbolizes violence and the shedding of blood. And then
the white horse is tyranny.
Because of that,
that's what the white horse is.
Right.
It's tyranny.
Depends on your. That gets also into your level of interpretation, as it's also been. If you look at any time of wars happened, we'll use the Second World War. How many nations did the League of Nations allow Mustache Man to march into before they finally said enough? And it was when they said enough that declarations were thrown. It was even that way with the First World War. So it's not just tyranny; it is unjustly taking what is yours under dominion.
It's conquest, it's conquest. It's conquering. It's basically the Assyrian and Babylonian conquest that John is referencing, because he's going back to ancient Israel's history, and he's like, "Here's what happened, and it's going to happen again."
Let's not forget
the point I'm making is the conquest occurs first, then he makes war with the saints, and then following that comes famine. and then being unalived is represented by the pale horse, the final horse. So we think that these come, but there's a certain progression to these, that when you look at wartime, it comes by way of political conquest, and then war is initiated. And then because of war, there is famine. And then because of famine, there is unprecedented being unalived because of famine, because of war. And so they're so interrelated and independent with one another. And I don't know if people have made that connection.
No, they have. Like Richard Draper, tons of scholars have made this, and like all the commentary I have, he basically says white horse equals conquest, tyranny, which is unrighteous dominion that leads to the red horse. The red horse equals war, contention, warmongering, civil unrest that leads to the black horse. The black horse is famine, economic oppression, so greed, oppressing the poor. Price manipulation is one of those things that John describes. Things that cause famines for the poor, and this leads to the pale horse, which is not just people like death, it's also disease. And so this is because it represents like a green yellowish color, which they viewed as like a corpse color. And so Richard Draper, in his book, he has one that he wrote with Michael Rhodes that's really good, where it's like they did a translation in like a new Greek, like from the Greek, like a new translation of it. It's really cool. And then he also has the book Opening the Seven Seals. And both of those books on the book of Revelation, it does a huge deep dive into the four horsemen, the four angels, the four winds, the seven trumpets, the seven vials of wrath, or bowls or vials, same thing. And so anyway, the horsemen are good. That's a pretty interesting motif. It's not actually the one in section 133 though.
Right. Can I ask a quick question? So I've had this thought before. I want to bring it up here and ask the panel or whatever, but I've kind of looked at what Nephi does and even Elijah does when they have the sealing key with being an archetype of these things in judgment toward the people. And so I might be inappropriately thinking this, but would that be something that the prophet, the president of the church, holds as a key where he unlocks these things? Or is this only commanded from heaven?
Well, I think if you look at the precedent, because that's where we get these ideas, right? It comes from the precedents that Isaiah is talking about, that John is talking about, that Nephi is talking about. They're all talking about the same thing. I think Daniel, I think all of them saw the same vision. And then they tell it in their own way. And some of them focus on certain aspects than others. Isaiah gives you a very big, broad view from about the time that the wrath of God is being poured out on the earth. But then John, he gives you everything leading up to that causes the wrath, and he gives you like the whole history with the seals. And so they all kind of are seeing the same thing, but you can tell that you're kind of accessing different viewpoints, if you will.
Enoch as well. Yeah.
Right. And Enoch too, and Ezekiel and Zechariah, and all of these things kind of come together. And I think what's cool about section 133 is it's actually pulling from every single one of those, and it's pulling in certain motifs. And the reason why I wanted to like highlight the motifs is because I think it can be a little bit overwhelming to like come at it from verse by verse and then try to figure out how to link it up. But when you put it based on the motifs and divide it up by the motifs, then all of a sudden you get this overview. And I'll share my screen really quick. I'll just show you guys really quick how I came at this, just so if you want to do it, you can.
Well, just real quick again, is it that the prophet would have the keys to that and he'd be the one releasing? This is kind of like maybe an opinion thing. I don't know. I mean,
it's probably more esoteric, so it's probably an opinion thing. But but like I would say yes. And the reason why I would say that is because when you look at what happened with Moses and Elijah, that's what happened. The prophet basically went before a nation and said, okay, this is your warning. It was during a time when the people themselves were being oppressed. They were not able to function freely. And because of that, there's like this intervention by a servant of the Lord. The servant of the Lord goes before the powers that be and is basically like, hey, I'm here representing the God of Israel. And he says, if you don't let us go, you're going to be in trouble. And then they're in trouble. So it's basically
even Isaiah to an extent, right? He gets thrown in prison and all that. Yes. like, even though he's in his own nation. And so then the point that I was kind of wondering about, I'm sorry to sidetrack a little bit, but is the family proclamation something where they foresaw because they hold those keys of seership, right?
I think it is.
And that was like the key goes in the lock. I'm not saying the key got turned, but it feels like the key went into the lock on something.
But we're on lock right now.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no,
because
I think we are.
20 years later, all of a sudden, because in the last 10 years, so it's 30 years old. In the last 10 years, it's been insane. 20 years
Right.
later, all of a sudden, it's like there's a pouring out.
Well, even
And it
the
was
family
almost
proclamation references these prophecies, right? Like it's going back to the prophecies against the nations.
Yeah.
And it's going back to what Section 133 is saying. And I think,
Right.
so, okay, so I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm just going to show you really quick how I organize this because we're not going to have time to go through this all. But I did kind of like a 1-minute summary of everything that I put in here. And I had to have AI help me with that because it was really hard to summarize this, but I did. I got it into 2 paragraphs. And then down here, so what I did here was I basically put together like what I thought were the main kind of like symbols of this or the main motifs. So these are the motifs that I could see that were in there. And then I basically just went through, and after I went through and did these notes, I did like a little summary of them, but I just went through and I was kind of like, hey, here's the motifs I'm seeing. And then I went through and I tried to do like, okay, where am I seeing it? And then after that, then I went through and I was like, okay, here's each of those motifs. And then I pulled in some commentary that I had. Like I had all this in my annotations and my scriptures where you can see kind of like this is pulling from the apocryphal book of Enoch. And it's just showing like the winds motif. And so you can see how, what does the winds represent? And how is it connected to the 4 angels, the 4 beasts, the 4 horsemen, the 4 corners of the earth, and the number 4? And essentially the number 4 we get from the biblical numbers is it just means like the 4 corners of the earth. It means like the total like coverage of the earth, like the whole world basically in totality. And so it's just talking about all of this commentary that I have just kind of speaks to each one of these little motifs that's happening. The destroying angel one is really interesting because we tend to look at it one way, but I think there's 2 things happening that maybe sometimes we forget. One is there's angels of destruction, but there's also they also protect. And it really has to do with the covenant curse or covenant blessing. There's covenants on the land, and just like it says in Ether, what is it, like chapter, I don't even remember, chapter 3, chapter 2, where he's basically talking about, the covenant on the land. And if you're not keeping, like worshiping Jehovah or following his laws, then you get swept off the land. And so there's like these ideas of like land covenants that apply to everybody, whether they know it or not. They're under covenant because it's God's world. It's not man's world. And a stewardship, even though the Lord gives us stewardship in the earth, it's still his world. And that's the theme that you get out of the book of Revelation. And then this was that Wilford Woodruff commentary. Here's some commentary from Richard Draper. This is like the seal of the living God and the 4 angels. His books are really helpful. I really enjoyed them. I think they're fun reads. If you guys want to know more about the book of Revelation, I would start with Opening the 7 Seals by Richard Draper, and then maybe look at the one that he did with Michael Rhodes where they did the extra like new translation from the Greek. That one was really interesting too. And then I think there's another one. I think it was by Eric Brandt that was really good too that I read. And then this one is about the Flee Babylon. This is all commentary. I have a lot from Don Perry and from Richard Draper. Don Perry has a book called Understanding the Signs of the Times. It's really interesting. This is where he gets into the 4 winds, and this is all Perry's commentary right here. And he does like a verse by verse on all of the verses in section 133 that we were just talking about. And he kind of gives you just like a little spiel on each one of these. And ultimately right here is probably a key verse, verse 4, sanctify yourselves. That's basically what we're trying to do. We're trying to sanctify ourselves. And we do that through the covenant, this everlasting covenant. And then what Malachi prophesied, it's through those keys that were restored in Kirtland and by linking ourselves to each other and to our ancestry, our posterity, and then like laterally, like that got done right at the beginning of the restoration. And it's just interesting because the whole goal you can see is to link everyone back together so that then all the names, all the ordinances, everything can get recorded in that book of life, and then that report can be given. So it talks about, sometimes I think people look at the 10 tribes and the records. It talks about their records, and I think sometimes we might think of that as scriptures, but it doesn't actually use the word scriptures. The sealed portion of the Book of Mormon is scripture that we're prophesied to get. But with the tribes, it talks about their records, bringing forth their records, and then it talks about how this like magnifies and multiplies. So I tend to think of this, and I've done a deep dive on this, and I felt like my takeaway from it is actually that they're doing what we're doing, which is they're bringing their records of their ancestry, their genealogy, and their book, if you will,
Right.
and they're doing that work and getting those ordinances recorded into that book. And I think that's the records that they bring, because this is what actually causes the multiplicity of blessings that Joseph Smith was prophesying, and what these other ancient prophets are prophesying. It's that bringing everyone into the covenant, both the living and the dead, that this work is happening on both sides of the veil. That's how the multiplicity of blessings comes. It comes through ancestry and posterity being linked eternally back into this order, this family of God. So they have to link to Jesus Christ. He's the one who we link up with, because he's the birthright son who's worthy, who is the heir, and as we join ourselves to him, then we become the joint heirs. So this is I think what my biggest takeaway would be. If you look at all of these motifs, you gain this, what I think is a beautiful picture, which is, this merger, if you will, with Jesus Christ. And the bridegroom motif helps with that, but you can also think of it as like a family restoration, which I think is more how Malachi frames it. And the bride and bridegroom motif is helpful, because if you think of the church as the bride, then it's what the church is doing, right? It's the collective that joins with Jesus Christ, and then it keeps getting added upon, right, through the posterity, through the lineage.
It's the means by which Christ has a posterity.
Yes,
Right.
and then at the burning, at this great day of wrath, this great and dreadful day, it's great because there's going to be that wedding, right, the merger of the bride and the bridegroom. But in connection with that, on the flip side, there's the burning. And so this is where people are left with neither root nor branch. It's because they are burned away. Okay, there's neither root nor branch. Like there's no posterity, no ancestry. They're alone. And this is like the flip side, the covenant curse side. And so I think that, I don't know, that's what was coming across to me the most. And there's a lot of beautiful imagery in the wine press. I got tons of like commentary on that too, the wine press, and just some of these other really cool motifs that are happening there, like the dyed garments and the year of the redeemed, and just kind of like some of those pretty symbolic things that have to do with Jesus Christ. But the one that probably ties more with section 134 was the weak things threshing the nations and the little one becoming a strong nation. So let me pull that up really quick and show you, because it'll just take too long to explain it. But if you look at these verses, these are the key verses. It's 57 to 59, okay? You get this idea of the fullness of the gospel, this everlasting covenant. And that we need that covenant. That's how we prepare the world for the second coming of the Lord. We ourselves have to be linked. We have to become those kings and queens of the Gentiles that Nephi prophesied would bring the gospel and take this covenant to the rest of the house of Israel, to like those, to like all the people who are of the house of Israel, and they've been lost and scattered and may or may not know who they are. And some do, some still identify with the house of Israel. And so we have this motif in scripture. And one of the things that I didn't have time to get to, but I'll just refer to, is I personally really like Abraham Gileadi's books, and there's a book of his that I really enjoyed. It's called The Last Days, Types and Shadows, from the Bible and the Book of Mormon. I like his dissertation too. It's the literary message of Isaiah, and one of the things that he's able to show really well is how the word Gentile is used across the canon in like 5 different ways. And the way that we tend to look at it is Gentiles bad out of the covenant and House of Israel good in the covenant. And we don't look at it, I think, as ourselves. Like, we don't tend to read ourselves into the idea of Gentiles, but there are some contexts where it is talking about us that are of, the tribe of Ephraim and who are coming into the church from one of the houses of Israel in the last days, like from one of the lost tribes, these scattered tribes. And each tribe has a specific role to play in this gathering of Israel. And if you go back into Genesis and you look up the blessings that Jacob gives to his 12 sons, then you get an understanding of the role that the tribe can play in the gathering of Israel in the last days. But one thing that we all have in common, I think, is what is being said here in section 133, which is that we all have a covenant responsibility to bring people into this covenant, to extend and share the covenant. And if we are doing that, then it's like what President Nelson said: anytime you do anything to help anyone on, either side of the veil to make and keep covenants, then you are helping to gather Israel. And that can be you as a parent raising righteous children. That can be you doing your ancestry and genealogy work, going and taking names to the temple. It can be doing it for somebody else. Like, if your family's got their whole history done, good for you, but there's other people who don't, and you could be helping them. You can be doing missionary work. We send missionaries. You can be doing, like, all of the charity and the humanitarian work that we do. This is all part of that mission of the church, that fourfold mission. And it's all with one goal, which is to extend this covenant and help it roll out to the earth the way that it was described in the scriptures, and particularly in section 109.
Right on. All right. Well, we are at time. But anyone have any thoughts they want to add in here?
No, this is a very rich section. It's very interesting to study. I think for me, the biggest takeaway is what are we doing as individuals? What am I doing as an individual to prepare myself for the coming of Christ? And not so much preparing myself, but what am I doing to be able to share the hope and the assurance of faith with other people? And I think that when it comes to the way we have conversations, especially online, is how are we able to present the gospel, give a defense of our faith, and to address some of the criticisms that we get, and to do it in a way that is inviting to people so that they can come and learn more about what it is that we believe, and not just buy into all the misinformation out there, and to really understand that we are about getting people to a place where they can come into that covenant relationship like Jessica was talking about, so that they too themselves can be prepared in meeting the Lord and when he comes again, whenever that happens, whenever that occurs, and what that may look like.
I'll go next then. I was waiting to see if Mosiah wanted to. I'll go.
Yeah, you're good, Mike. I just had I had a really not a thought that is not applicable to this. So you go first.
Okay. So I wrote this out a little bit because I was thinking more like 134. Obviously, 133. Out of 133, the part that I like best is verses 32 to 35. I don't know where that fell in your collection motifs there, Jessica, but the reason I like it is because it's a little complicated maybe, but it's talking about the children of Ephraim receiving the riches of the world and then turning around and blessing Israel, or at least the tribe of Judah specifically. And it's really that Ephraim kind of takes on that role of being the sons of Levi. So when we see in scripture about the sons of Levi offering, unto the Lord an offering of righteousness in this temple again, our temple president, President Turk in the Gilbert, Arizona temple, the first week, so he's new. He's been for a couple months. His first week was like, I need you all to understand, you brothers and you sisters, you are the sons of Levi described in the scripture. And we need to act in accordance with that. it had been pressed before, but it was like really impactful that's what he's gearing everybody at. And the role for the sons or the children of Levi or of Ephraim to fill that role of the Levitical children as well, those priests, that priestly role, and that you're to bless the other tribes, right? And you map out Israel, and you have Levi in the middle and all the other tribes around, and you're kind of protected in there, but you get the riches from everything. And so it's
and remember Joseph in Egypt and his story and how his brothers had sold him into Egypt. He loses his identity, kind of like they don't know who he is. And then remember how he had that dream where he saw them all around him. And they were like, oh, that little brat, he thinks we're all gonna worship him. But it wasn't talking about that, right? It was talking about this end time.
Yep. And so there's that, and I really like that, and the point, like, also because of what 134 says, and just, I'm sorry to bring it up, but way too much hatred of the juicy people. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it straight up, but in the world today, and it's being driven from all angles and directions. And the fact of the matter is, as Latter-day Saints, one of our main objectives is to bless the children of Judah. And that's what this says. And it means the literal children. This isn't well, we're the children. No, we're not the children of Judah. We're the sons of Levi. We're the children of Abraham, or of Abraham too, but of Ephraim. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we need to take seriously what the scripture means and stop trying to pretend and placate others and play nice with the Babylonian things of the world and go along to get along with philosophies and ideas that don't mesh. We spent boom.
You guys, this whole book, I'm telling you, the very beginning, the whole thing is an essay he wrote on idolatry for that Hugh Nibley thing that they did a long time ago. It was and it is so about that, what you just said. It's Latter-day Saints specifically, you have you are a workhorse, basically. You are going to serve. That is your goal. That is your goal. Right. That is what Joseph in Egypt did. And that is the role that we play in the end time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so it's that, and the other side of it is, and it coincides and it goes along with what I was saying, right? We're supposed to be peaceable and be the peacemakers. Is if you have trouble or you find it necessary with the idea of being peaceable, if you find it necessary to inflict force in any degree, any measure of a righteous dominion, you're going to have a hard time dealing with living in Zion. You're not going to have a place there. And there's a couple of scriptures, and this is 45 and 62, D&C sections 45 and 62. The first one is, and it shall come to pass among the wicked that every man that will not take his sword against his neighbor must needs flee unto Zion for safety. I don't know how big Zion's going to be, but I know that there's at least that one barrier of entry that, and Zion is talked about as having exclusivity. There's walls and there's qualifications. At least this one, right? You're not going to take your sword against your neighbor. But because you're not going to do that, you're going to need to come to Zion for safety. The other one, and there shall be gathered unto it out of every nation under heaven, and it shall be the only people that shall not be at war one with another. And we talk about the preparatory wars, then you get into the wars of destruction, and you think about not taking your sword against your neighbor. And I think about what happened at the end with the Nephites. Mm-hmm. And even the Jaredites, but I think more so the Nephite comparison. They were all willing to pick up the sword. It was the women and children in battle too. They were all willing to go march, pick up the sword, go after their neighbors. And all it did was destroy themselves. And they would curse and curse and curse and never repent. And the world is heading in a direction of that as well. And again, I don't know how large Zion is going to be. I'm a little more optimistic than a lot of other people I see out there. So I'm a glass half full kind of guy. But, I hope for as large a Zion as we can get. But I'm not stupid and ignorant about what will end up happening is you're going to have to separate yourself from your friends, from your family to some degree, even. Right. Mm-hmm. And trust in the Lord that his atonement will reconnect those links.
Well, you can, because you can intercede for the people.
Right. We act as little saviors. The Savior's
Mhm.
on Mount Zion.
Savior's
right?
on Mount Zion.
Yeah, we're the planting of the vineyard of the holy, on the holy mountain. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of time, right? It's like a matter of patience. And this is why like I try not to worry too much about, like, if I worried all the time about like everyone that I care about leaving the church, or not living the gospel, or not knowing about it, I would be worried 24/7 and feel like I had no life whatsoever of my own, because my every minute and every waking hour would have to be spent on like missionary work and like
Right.
other people's salvation. And we can't choose for other people. But what
No.
I love that the Lord gives us, at least in this restored church, is he gives us power. Okay? He gives us power to intercede as proxy saviors and do work for others that
Right.
they cannot do for themselves.
Right. Xander.
All right. Well, I'm going to do the unrelated thought first, because we are the LDS Village people. I'm just sitting there. I'm like, we
Village
got
people?
Monty's. Yeah, we got Monty's the school teacher.
Oh gosh.
You got the Jessica's. I mean, I don't know what so we just got a woman. We got this. We got the football dad is Mike.
I
Cowboy.
think Tim's Scooby picture was better.
And then-
We had Monty the Lion. I don't know what I was, like a merger between Velma and Daphne.
You-
and then, but, I'm here
Honestly, that would be a good
but,
compliment, though, Jessica. That's
yeah.
I was thinking about that because I was watching down Periscope in the end with Village Peoples in the Navy, but I was like, wait a second, this doesn't add. Like, I knew this seemed familiar. We're the Village People, just for LDS apologists.
LDSA.
I don't know if I can be lumped in with the apologist crowd, guys. Like, really, truly, like, I just can't.
It's hard to be an apologist.
You're our second coming expert, Jessica.
I like studying covenant, second coming, eschatology, and I could care less what the rest of the world thinks about us. I really could. Like, I could care less. It doesn't matter to me. All those people on TikTok, whatever. Don't even waste my time with it. I'm just like, no, I don't have time for this. You know why? Because we have such a rich, beautiful gospel that I could not even possibly learn in a lifetime.
Right.
But no, like my actual final thought, though, because and this will probably be I don't think Monty will let me come back to that Village People reference.
I'm never going to let you live it down, Xander. That's
Hey, I like the Village People.
Hey, bad.
Next on
Hey,
TikTok
bad. So long
Live.
as you're not watching any of their music videos.
Yeah.
Just listen to the music.
All right, let's put on one of those. Hey, Monty, you want to do a screen share real quick?
Okay, go for it.
But no, I was joking. I was like, we're gonna put one of the music videos on. I really get kicked out. But no, like and this is kind of when I like, the text I sent you this morning. Like, I don't think when you look at 133, 134, it fit, and you just read them as they are. You're like, they are beautiful set. But when you pair them to what 35 is, they are the prelude to Carthage. Even though they were years before, these literally are showing what is right about to come in 135. If you pair all three together in a very symbolic way, which, as morbid as it is, like 135 is probably like my second favorite section in D&C. Because when paired with 133 and 134, but 133, 134 pair together like peanut butter and sardines on a sandwich. Don't knock it till you try.
Well, I think section 1 and 133 are what pairs together, because that's the preface and the appendix. And Joseph had like specifically paralleled those two, like all the language parallels. If you look at the first few verses in 133, they match section 1. And so it's like they're like bookends, except that the way that we have it ordered in the Doctrine and Covenants doesn't really reflect that it's bookends. You have to actually read them together to see that they're bookends.
Right. But like when we start getting into, the symbology in 133, pair it to 134, especially, Mike said with the juicy people today. I hate TikTok language.
Right.
But
I don't know what I'm about to say. Sorry.
But when you pair that, but like I was thinking about, when you look at section 11, pair it with 134, but then even dive into, we talk about, we uphold the law. the saints did everything right. And what did where did it lead us? To what to the events of Carthage and an expedition west, which we could get into that a little bit more. Monty and I had a really great question about that one today.
Yeah.
Well, we could look at President Nelson's Exodus repeated for next week if you guys want.
But well, that's what I was going to. I said when you get in, especially like why. Again, the symbology in 133. It's not. My mom was actually texting me like, "You buy this?" I'm like, we are the only species that created the A-bomb. Like, is it really doomsday to say, hey, we're going to, and I'm like, if there's a God, I'm pretty sure he's going to go, I better show up before they clear the board. But, when you get it, we're the only ones that have paved our own destruction. And if there's a God who is going to have to, intervene or even reappear, or come again second time, it will be in the midst of us carving our own destruction, whether it's through spiritual or physical means. It's beautiful to see the symbology of, hey, those who are faithful are going to run. I don't want to say it's the coward tactic, because if I know where I can go to be safe.
And we're going to run to the nearest temple that's going to take off to outer space.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
maybe that's what they're doing with the Salt Lake Temple. They're retrofitting it with rockets.
Hey! I'm with the LDSSA, Latter-day Saints Security Agency. I can't have you spilling that secret there, Monty. It's full of men in black suits and a white van to be at your door in about 5 seconds.
Oh, I know them. They're good friends.
But no. Get back to and I said I didn't really think I'd be here tonight, so I didn't really do a lot of study. My speed run was 10-minute study of, oh crap, I got to hurry and read the sections. But read it, and it's like the angel. You get but again, it's not just an angel goes proclaims the world. The angel's going out and proclaiming, here's what to look for. Here's also, I got 4 buddies coming right behind me. Like, you don't want to meet them. He's like, they're my scary dog privilege.
Yeah, pretty much.
But then it's, but it's like, if you actually listen, those angels are going.
It's like a Christmas
it mimics
carol.
the Passover. Yeah, well, it mimics Passover. If you follow it, know the signs, know what to mark your door with. Those 4 are going, I know we like these guys. Let's keep moving. And as unfortunate as that is, the historian in me, history repeats itself, and it will repeat itself until we learn our lesson.
Until we get humanity it right.
Humanity never does. I said, Jessica says Revelation, when we were talking, it goes back to the Babylonians, the Assyrians, then the Greeks, then the Romans.
Yeah, just like Gilead does. Yeah, right there.
Then the Ottomans. Then whatever the heck happened with World War I.
It's like all modern idolatry, and how it leads to exactly what you're saying. It causes this like conquest, those 4 horsemen. It like starts with that like desire of worshiping the things in the world and the power and the just the getting gain. And it's like the whole thing is. I think what I like about this is it's precipitated by God's people first, like we're the covenant people today. And I think this is like the main message and takeaway of the Book of Mormon too. It's like in the end time, you talked about the last is first, the first is last. Well, in the end time, this gospel goes to the Gentiles, and then the Gentiles, which is us. And you see this in, I think it's section 109 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where in the prayer that is given, Joseph like identifies, or the Lord identifies us with the Gentiles. He uses it the same way Nephi does. So he's basically saying, hey, you who are the lost tribes of Israel that got scattered, he's referring back to that northern kingdom scattering, who got scattered into those north countries. You guys are the ones who have this role to play in the end time, again, tying back to Joseph and Ephraim. And you guys are the ones who need to take the gospel to the world. But you see these 2 things happening, and I think you get this a lot out of Isaiah, where there's different groups of people. There's like these different spiritual categories of people. There's like people who really do like love Babylon and they just worship everything Babylon and they are just immersed in it.
Right.
And then you have the people who are like the Jacob Israel people, in to use like Gileadi's framework. I think this is really helpful. But they're like the people who they may be of the house of Israel and not know who they are, or they may know who they are now, but they're kind of just, they're teetering between Babylon and Zion. And they're just kind of like in that middle space that like
Right.
Neil A. Maxwell, I think he would talk a lot about this, but just how eventually that middle space is going to go away. You can't straddle the fence. Like eventually a choice will be made. And this is like a theme in Isaiah. And I think this is a theme in section 133 and in the Doctrine and Covenants, like in full, is that there really are two churches only, like Nephi said, and you have to make the choice. You can't hang out.
Right.
You can't constantly be like having a vacation or a summer home or whatever Neil A. Maxwell said in Babylon and then like your main home in Zion. It's like it doesn't work that way. Like you can't keep visiting Babylon. You have to choose to come up to Zion.
Well, I don't know. They have some beautiful hanging gardens.
There's a lot of good entertainment over there in Babylon, but we need to elevate and love all the things that are lovely and of good report.
There, we can have just as good and just as entertaining stuff in Zion. I tell you what.
Right.
Yeah, but hanging gardens of Zion just does not roll off the tongue.
It will.
I don't know.
You'll get used to it.
That we
We'll get
can't
used
find
to it.
them, so you know. I
Yet.
kind of like my hanging gardens. They're in Nineveh.
Yet.
They actually think they found them, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
I just gotta say, it's always fun at CFM. Sorry, I said that Village People idea is stuck in my head. So now you know I gotta get a picture of Scoot. I gotta figure something out for
We need
Scooby.
memes, man. We need memes.
Yeah.
You gotta get
Dude,
creative.
we got
We got memes.
people who are still in the comments or people who are going to be watching this in the future. Hi from the past, by the way. Make memes. We'll love them. we may actually have a segment here in the future. Hey, what did people make today? Let's laugh at our faces. All right, let's see here. In any case, so kind of my final thoughts here, right? I really like a lot of the Second Coming stuff and the Second Coming motifs. Like that's not necessarily a lot of the focus on my own personal channel, but that's one of the reasons why I go to you, Jessica, or to Jared, or any of the others that are out there, because they have such very interesting takes and a lot of the study that they have related to the Second Coming and things like that. And that's what I think section 133 is directly talking about here. And this is something that, like, from the early days of the church, this is something that they continually look forward to. This is section 133 was revealed in 1831, for crying out loud. I still just like it blows my mind every time I look at that. It just showcases what is the goal of the restoration. It was to usher in the second coming of Jesus Christ. That's why it needed to happen. And honestly, I do think that like it is important that, like, especially with Come Follow Me, it is paired with section 134, because like we talked about at the very beginning, this would not be occurring. The second coming would not have the foundations laid if it didn't have if there wasn't a place where where the restoration could be fulfilled almost unabated. That doesn't mean that persecution didn't rage. That doesn't mean that armies didn't combine or calumny didn't defame. But just like Joseph prophesied in the Wentworth letter, the truth of God rolls forth boldly, nobly, and independent. It is still penetrating every clime. It is still visiting every continent, and is still being sounded in every ear. With the technology that we have, the fact that we have this platform, the fact that we're able to come together from different parts of the country, and in some cases, different parts of the world. Like Xander, you and I on TikTok very frequently associate with folks from the UK, Australia. Mm-hmm. There are people from Saudi Arabia that sometimes come into our lives and interact with us there.
Where's the Nephi boat? Where's the Nephi boat?
Where Nephi boat? That's a completely different subject. But no.
Yeah, it's like the highway out of the deep, right?
Right. But the thing is, though, is that even in places where the church cannot legally go in and proselytize, we're filling those gaps. We're able to reach people from where we are in the United States to people all over the world. This is prophecy fulfilled. And this is where the
Right.
second coming is truly getting close at hand. And this is where the warnings that are laid out in section 133 in the entire book of Revelation, Nephi's vision from 1 Nephi 11 through 17, all of that is, or 1 Nephi 11 through 11
And the
through
family
15.
proclamation.
And the family proclamation, which we're going to be going over here in just a few weeks.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so we can tie it all back.
And we can go back and showcase a lot of all things, because this is all culminating in what the Savior wants and how the Father has laid things out for the second coming of his Son. So, with that, we'll end that here. Thanks all for coming here. We are going to go into Carthage next week, sections 135 and 136. We'll see you all then. Thanks for coming.
Wait, you're letting me back
Yep,
after
thanks
calling
for
us the
joining.
village people?
Maybe. You have to
I
make
have no
moves.
choice, Xander.
Everybody,
we need
oil's in the
the
lamp.
comedic relief.
Get your oil in the lamp, trim it.
Yeah, there we
Yes.
go.
There you go. Xander, we're letting you back. Everybody needs a comedic relief. So
Oh, glad I'm on the comedic relief.
all right,
Could
have
have
a good
been
night,
worse. Could have
everybody.
been the heretic.
That's good.
We'll see.
Have
Have a good night,
guys.
everybody.